May 1945. Flensburg, northern Germany. The Reich is gone, its cities in ruins, and its leaders either dead or hunted. And here, in a small naval academy turned makeshift government building, Heinrich Himmler, once the most feared man in Europe, wanders the corridors like a ghost. The architect of terror, the head of the SS, the man who controlled life and death, now reduced to a fugitive begging for relevance. His collapse didn't come in one dramatic moment. It came in small, pathetic steps, each one peeling away the myth he built around himself. Fact 1. The day his power evaporated in a single sentence on April 28, 1945, Heinrich Himmler made the most fatal mistake of his life. Convinced that Hitler was on the brink of death, and desperate to save himself, he arranged secret peace talks with Count Folke Bernadotte, a Swedish diplomat trusted by the Allies. Himmler believed that if he, the loyal servant of the Reich, presented himself as the reasonable successor, the Western Allies might negotiate a separate peace. In his mind, he was still the indispensable figure, the man who could stabilize Germany. What he didn't understand was that the Allies had already decided there would be no separate deals, no salvaging of the Nazi hierarchy, and certainly no mercy for him. When Hitler learned of these talks inside his bunker, the reaction was immediate and cold. A single statement, delivered through a radio broadcast, shattered Himmler's world. Himmler has committed treason. With those words, his power, built over 12 ruthless years, disappeared. Guards who once snapped to attention now avoided his eyes. Secretaries whispered behind his back. Even SS officers began quietly discarding their uniforms, distancing themselves from the man who once commanded absolute obedience. For the first time in his life, Himmler felt fear not as an administrator of terror, but as its target. He roamed the corridors, insisting it was all a misunderstanding, replaying his old fantasies of being the loyal German servant, the man who would be remembered as a statesman. But no one listened. The myth of Himmler, the organizer, the disciplinarian, the bureaucratic mastermind, collapsed into something smaller and far more pathetic. A man stripped of purpose, desperate for validation in a world that no longer needed him. It was the beginning of his unraveling. The fall didn't come from a gunshot or a dramatic arrest. It came in the silence that followed Hitler's words. In that silence, Heinrich Himmler realized his empire had vanished, and he, once the most powerful man after Hitler, was now just another refugee wandering a dying Reich. Fact 2. The walk through Flensburg. No one expected after Hitler condemned him, Himmler fled to Flensburg, the last fragment of the German government under Admiral Karl Dönitz. He arrived believing he could simply walk back into authority, that his presence alone would compel respect. But when he stepped inside the Naval Academy where Dönitz operated, the atmosphere froze. Officers avoided him, some staring at the floor, others pretending not to see him at all. The man who once controlled the fate of millions now had no office, no portfolio, no orders to give. Dönitz refused to meet him. Days earlier, Himmler could have summoned the admiral with a phone call. Now Dönitz wouldn't even acknowledge him. Himmler waited in a corridor for hours, expecting to be called in. No one approached. When he finally confronted an aide, the reply was blunt. "You have no position here." This rejection cut deeper than the Führer's broadcast. Himmler had always believed his power came from his efficiency and loyal service, not simply Hitler's favor. But standing in that hallway, ignored, unwelcome, he felt the truth for the first time. Without Hitler's protection, he was nothing, just another expelled official in a collapsing government. Witnesses later recalled how pale he looked, clutching his gloves like a schoolboy waiting outside a headmaster's office. His voice cracked when he asked for a meeting. At one point, he even tried to offer his services as Minister of Police once more, as if the war were still being administrated by memos. Dönitz finally sent word through an aide. Himmler is to leave at once. It was the final humiliation. The SS Reichsführer, who built a vast empire of camps, police networks, and intelligence units, was now being told to step outside like a dismissed clerk. That evening, Himmler walked out of the academy wearing dark glasses, hoping no one would recognize him. The irony was brutal. He spent years trying to be feared. Now he was terrified of being seen. Fact 3. The collapse of the SS loyalty myth. Himmler had always believed the SS would follow him anywhere. He built it as a racial order, indoctrinated its officers, demanded oaths of personal loyalty. In speeches, he proclaimed that the SS was loyal unto death. But in May 1945, when he fled Flensburg, he tried to contact his SS units and discovered that loyalty evaporated faster than his authority. Radio operators ignored his messages. Regional commanders refused to answer. His personal staff began slipping away one by one. Even his long-trusted adjutant, Werner Grothmann, started quietly burning documents and packing bags, preparing to abandon him at the first opportunity. The SS black uniforms, once symbols of absolute power, were now dangerous liabilities. Men tore off their insignia. Some buried their daggers and rings in forests. Others stole civilian clothes from barns and fled into the countryside. Himmler watched this unraveling with disbelief. His personal bodyguards asked if they could temporarily remove their SS badges. He agreed, but the humiliation stung. He had always preached that the SS was an elite order with iron discipline. Yet as soon as the Reich crumbled, they scattered like frightened men trying to outrun their own pasts. One moment burned in him, when he attempted to reach an SS armored division nearby. He believed the commander would send vehicles to escort him. Instead, the reply, delivered hours later, was a single devastating message. No forces available. It was a lie. They simply refused. The collapse of SS loyalty wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, subtle, 1,000 small silences. But for Himmler, it was the deepest wound of all. This was the organization he had molded in his image. Yet when he needed them most, he discovered something he never expected. Fear breaks faster than devotion. And the SS, stripped of purpose and hunted by the Allies, no longer feared him. The man who ruled through obedience now faced a reality he couldn't control. People who refused to obey. Fact 4. The pathetic disguise of a man who once ruled millions. By mid-May 1945, Himmler was reduced to hiding in barns, ditches, and abandoned sheds across northern Germany. He traveled with a small group of followers, all wearing mismatched civilian clothes. Himmler shaved his mustache, put on an eye patch he didn't need, and carried forged papers identifying him as Sergeant Heinrich Himmler. The most feared bureaucrat of the Reich, the man who oversaw extermination camps and intelligence networks, was now pretending to be an injured infantry clerk. His disguise was strangely pitiful. He wore ill-fitting boots, a raincoat 2 sizes too big, and cheap wire-frame glasses he believed made him look ordinary. But even in disguise, he couldn't let go of old habits. He continued arranging his belongings with bureaucratic precision, folding his documents, and lecturing his group about proper conduct. At night, he talked endlessly about how the Allies would eventually recognize his value and allow him a political role in post-war Germany. The men traveling with him exchanged glances. Some wondered if he truly understood the scale of his crimes, or the reality that awaited him. His delusion offered a strange contrast to the world around him. Villages burned, roads filled with refugees, Allied patrols searching every farmstead. One evening, as they hid near a forest, Himmler insisted on giving a speech, an absurd, rambling attempt to maintain authority. He spoke about rebuilding Germany, about discipline, and even praised the SS. His audience of exhausted fugitives stared back silently. No one saluted. No one responded. The war was over. His words meant nothing. By the time they approached a British checkpoint near Bremerwörde, Himmler still believed he could negotiate his way out. He rehearsed his story again and again, but the guards barely looked at him before ordering the group to line up for inspection. It was over, not with a gunshot or dramatic chase, but with a man in a stolen coat standing in a muddy line, holding forged papers that no longer protected him. Himmler's collapse wasn't the fall of a titan. It was the slow unraveling of a man whose power existed only as long as others obeyed. And now, no one did. Fact 5. The moment the British saw through his disguise. On May 21, 1945, at a small checkpoint near Bremerwörde, Himmler faced the one thing he never believed possible: being treated like an ordinary fugitive. The British guards, tired from weeks of processing refugees, barely glanced at him. His forged papers, Heinrich Himmler, Feldwebel, were accepted at first. But there was something off. His manner of speech too polished, his posture too rigid. His attempt to look insignificant failed because he didn't understand how real soldiers carried themselves after surrender. They were broken, resigned. Himmler still tried to appear important even while pretending not to be. During a routine search, a corporal noticed something strange. The man refused to let go of a folded document pouch. Inside, hidden among minor papers, was a real SS identity card, still bearing Himmler's unmistakable signature. The corporal called the officer on duty. When they ordered Himmler to remove his eye patch, he hesitated. That split-second pause sealed his fate. A British lieutenant took a closer look and whispered to another guard, "We have someone big here." Rumors spread quickly. Men approached, staring at the stranger with growing suspicion. Himmler tried to speak, offering cooperation, insisting on meeting the appropriate authorities. But his voice shook. Soldiers began comparing his face to sketches posted on Allied boards. The resemblance was undeniable. When they asked for his real name, he finally muttered, "Heinrich Himmler." Not a confession, more a sigh, as if he hoped saying it would restore some dignity. It didn't. To the British soldiers, he wasn't a feared minister. He wasn't the head of the SS. He wasn't even interesting. He was just another war criminal caught by accident. They loaded him into a truck beside two stunned fugitives. For the first time in his life, Himmler realized the world looked at him without fear and without respect. It was a humiliation greater than any defeat. Fact 6. The interrogation that exposed his delusions. When the British transferred Himmler to the interrogation center at Westertimke, they expected to deal with a broken man. Instead, they encountered something stranger, a delusional bureaucrat who still believed he had political value. Sitting at a plain wooden table under a single lamp, Himmler tried to control the conversation. He spoke about his service to Germany, claimed the camps were administrative necessities, and insisted he had always worked for European stability. The British officers, many of them veterans who had seen the camps with their own eyes, stared in stunned disbelief. They asked direct questions about atrocities. Himmler dodged. They confronted him, with evidence. He minimized. He attempted to explain the SS as a disciplined police organization, ignoring the fact that British soldiers had recently liberated Bergen-Belsen and witnessed horrors beyond imagination. Perhaps the most telling moment came when he tried to offer himself as a mediator between the Allies and the German people. It was as if his mind could not register that the Third Reich no longer existed. At one point, he even requested protection, claiming he was certainly hated by many dangerous elements. The interrogators recorded that he appeared oddly calm, almost proud. He folded his hands carefully, avoided eye contact when pressed, and spoke in an unemotional monotone. This wasn't inner strength. It was the final stage of denial. Himmler had spent years building an ideological world where he was essential. Now, with Germany defeated, he was trying desperately to rebuild that world inside his own mind. The British officers quickly understood something crucial. Himmler wasn't negotiating. He was fantasizing. There would be no deals, no role in post-war Germany, no future. He was a man talking to ghosts, ghosts of a power that no longer existed. Fact 7. The night he tried to rewrite history in his last statements. On the evening of May 23, 1945, Himmler was placed in an isolated barracks room under heavy guard. He was told he would be moved to an official interrogation facility the following day. This was a standard procedure. But to Himmler, it felt like the final chance to shape how history would judge him. He asked for paper. None was provided. So he began dictating to the British officer present, attempting to clarify his role in the regime. What followed was not a confession, but a staggering attempt to rewrite everything. He claimed he had protected Jews by sending them to camps instead of letting them be killed in the field. He claimed the SS maintained order during the war. He described himself as a misunderstood moderate inside the Nazi hierarchy, an almost surreal assertion given the scale of his crimes. The officer noted that Himmler spoke as though giving a lecture, using administrative terms, avoiding any mention of murder, extermination, or genocide. He referred to mass deportations as transfers, to slave labor as special assignments, and to death camps as facilities of national security. This was not regret. It was performance, an attempt to leave behind a sanitized version of himself. He seemed genuinely convinced that future historians might consider him a pragmatist who made necessary decisions. As he talked, his voice grew softer. His hands trembled slightly, not from guilt, but from a dawning realization. None of this mattered. The British officer wasn't moved. His words would not save him. History had already passed judgment. For the first time, a flicker of panic appeared behind his glasses. Himmler understood that the narrative he'd built for years, of the dutiful servant, the planner, the builder, would not survive the night. Fact 8. The poison capsule and the final cowardice. Late that night, when the British prepared to conduct a medical inspection, Himmler's collapse reached its final moment. A doctor asked him to open his mouth. At first, Himmler resisted, clenching his teeth, mumbling that the procedure was unnecessary. Two soldiers stepped forward. One gripped his jaw. That was when they saw it, a small white object tucked between his molars, a cyanide capsule. For weeks, Himmler had carried it hidden in a gap in his cheek, a method taught to elite SS officers, a last resort escape from accountability. He had told others that suicide was dishonorable. He lectured SS men to face destiny with courage. Yet he, the man who orchestrated death for millions, had never intended to face trial. He had always planned to vanish, to avoid judgment, to silence the truth before it reached the courtroom. When the doctor tried to pull the capsule out, Himmler jerked violently and bit down. The guards heard a faint crack, a metallic taste. Then his face contorted. He collapsed onto the floor, convulsing. The doctor tried to save him, shouting orders, massaging his heart. But the poison worked quickly. Within minutes, Heinrich Himmler, the man who built a machine of terror, was dead on a wooden floor in a British barracks, surrounded not by SS officers, not by loyal followers, but by bewildered enemy soldiers who barely recognized the pathetic figure dying before them. There were no speeches, no last words of defiance, no martyrdom, only the final act of a coward who had spent years preaching loyalty, obedience, and duty, yet chose to escape judgment with a hidden capsule, swallowed in panic. The collapse was complete. Fact 9. The autopsy that revealed the final truth about Himmler. After Himmler's sudden collapse, British medical officers carried his body to a nearby table for examination. The scene was strangely quiet. No officials from London, no historians, just a handful of soldiers performing a routine procedure, unaware they were handling one of the most infamous men of the century. His death had been so sudden, so undramatic, that the British almost treated the process like any other prisoner's case. They stripped him of his clothing and laid him under a simple lamp. The body looked nothing like the towering figure of Nazi mythology. His skin was pale and soft, his frame thin from weeks of running. The glasses, which had once been a defining part of his image, now sat crookedly on a nearby table. The autopsy confirmed cyanide poisoning. The familiar almond smell lingered in the room. A small glass shard, the remains of the capsule, was found lodged between his teeth. One British doctor, who had seen the camps only weeks earlier, stared at the body and muttered that it seemed impossible. This frail figure had overseen such vast brutality. The contrast was unsettling. The architect of a regime built on racial power, discipline, and iron will, reduced to a corpse lying on a barracks table, outsmarted not by armies, but by his own fear. There was no ceremony, no prayers, no attempt to preserve the body for history. The Allies viewed him not as a relic, but as a criminal who had evaded justice. When the examination ended, they wrapped him in a simple blanket and prepared a grave with no marker, no stone, no name. An end deliberately stripped of dignity, ensuring that no follower could turn his grave into a shrine. The autopsy revealed something deeper than medical fact: the hollowness of the man behind the myth. Fact 10. The secret burial that erased him from the earth. In the early hours of May 24, 1945, the British loaded Himmler's body onto a military vehicle. There was no procession, no record for historians to consult later. Just 2 officers and a driver, traveling down a dark rural road outside Lübeck. They stopped at a wooded area where a shallow pit had already been dug. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting uneasy shadows over the quiet scene. Himmler's body was unloaded and lowered into the ground. The officers worked quickly, shoveling dirt until the pit was filled. They tamped the soil flat with their boots, erasing any trace of disturbance. When they were finished, one officer drew a rough map, then tore it into pieces. The fragments were burned. There would be no grave to find, no site for extremists to visit, no monument to distort into legend. The burial was intentionally anonymous. A man who obsessed over rituals, symbols, and sacred spaces was denied all of them. The Reichsfuhrer, who once commanded the SS cemetery rituals, declaring that the dead would live on in the order, was left in a forgotten patch of earth with no marker. Not even a wooden cross. It was a burial designed to deny him memory. And yet, in that simplicity, there was a quiet message. The terror he built would not outlive him in dignity or legacy. He would vanish into the soil, unnamed. Fact 11. The world's reaction. Indifference, not awe. When the news broke that Himmler was dead, the reaction across Europe was strangely muted. Newspapers reported it, but without the shock or fascination that had surrounded Hitler's suicide. Himmler was feared, yes, but he had never commanded the warped charisma of the Führer. His death brought no great sense of drama, no historical thunderclap. For many survivors of the camps, the feeling was not triumph, but frustration. They wanted him alive, on trial, forced to listen to testimony, stripped of lies, confronted with evidence he could not spin. Justice through exposure, not escape. But his suicide robbed them of that moment. Soviet officials dismissed his death as cowardice. British officers saw it as a bureaucrat taking the easy way out. American papers treated him as a secondary figure, overshadowed by Hitler and Goebbels. Even within Germany, the reaction was fragmented. Some civilians, finally learning the truth about the camps, spoke of him with revulsion. Others refused to believe he was truly dead, creating a brief wave of conspiracy rumors that he had fled to Argentina or Spain. But the truth was simpler. The world was moving on. Himmler, who once believed he would shape Europe's future, was becoming irrelevant before the war had even ended. His death meant little because, in the final months, he himself had become small, stripped of power, abandoned by followers, rejected by Hitler, dismissed by Dönitz, mocked by Allied interrogators. He wanted history to see him as a statesman. Instead, history barely paused to look at him. Fact 12. The collapse of the myth, what his end reveals about power. Himmler's final weeks revealed something that historians stress to this day. Authoritarian power often collapses not in a blaze of glory, but in a quiet, pathetic unraveling. Himmler spent years building a system based on fear, ritual, and control. But when pressure came, when the Reich crumbled, none of those tools protected him. His followers abandoned him. His ideology offered no escape. His prestige evaporated the moment Hitler withdrew his blessing. In the end, Himmler discovered something no totalitarian architect ever admits. Power built on terror dies the moment terror loses its grip. Without the uniforms, the titles, the office doors that once opened when he approached, he was no one. A fugitive in a borrowed coat, a bureaucrat with a forged name, a man arguing for relevance in an interrogation room where no one cared. His collapse wasn't a fall from greatness. It was the exposure of weakness that had always been there, hidden behind spectacles, files, and polished speeches. A man who imagined himself a visionary, reduced to chewing a poison capsule because he could not bear to face the world he had tried to reshape. Himmler's end shows how quickly a myth collapses when stripped of fear. Himmler tried to build a world ruled by obedience. In the end, not a single person obeyed him. His fall reminds us that some of history's darkest figures were never giants, only men whose illusions died the moment the world finally saw them clearly.